It is a truth that nature abhors a vacuum. This is a basic principle of existence and is readily understood. It is also a truth that wealth and information are forms of power. When used correctly, the one will always act to protect the other. Less understood is the point where these truths converge. At its height, the Ottoman Empire had the Janissaries. Throughout the empire, from every city to the smallest village, children were examined. The best and the brightest were selected, trained, and pressed into the service of the empire. Not merely soldiers. Janissaries were poets, architects, and craftsmen, and while the spirit of their order flourished, so too did the empire. Situated at the crossroads of the world, wealth and power flowed like wine, manipulated by masters of the craft, from the slyest vizier to the most elegant courtesan. Other nations held the empire in awe, and tribute flowed to its coffers. Before the Shorvanti Imperium landed, Imperial intelligence had already marked Topkapi Museum as a site of cultural significance worth preservation, but the reality of its pre-industrial splendors outstripped their imagings. Padded sedan chairs were exhibited, festooned with diamonds the size of a woman's fist. More sublime than the treasures of the earth were the treasures of craft and skill, works of gold and silver, carved, sewn, and wrought by the most cunning human artisans of their age, filled the halls of Topkapi Museum. In many respects, the empire was a pre-industrial mirror of the Imperium. The Shorvanti knew what they saw in Topkapi Palace. They understood it, and they acted to preserve it for the future. While the military had its say, cultural specialists had been consulted, sites had been earmarked, and though military bases were eliminated and the forces of Earth were reduced by force, Topkapi Museum, the Louvre, the Smithsonian, the Tate, the cultural works of humanity survived, unscathed. A sailing ship wrought of solid silver, a tribute to the empire from Napoleon Bonaparte, was duly transferred to the Governess Palace, where it remains on display in her private rooms. A small act, unnoticed by many, and although carefully preserved, it could technically be said that yes, the Shorvanti Imperium had sacked Istanbul. The Topkapi Museum, formerly the palace of the Ottoman court, was a wonder. It was also a shell of its former glory. The age of the Janissaries long vanished, its wealth a remainder of the power that once made it possible. Wealth and power serve one another. Sometimes ostentatious, wealth can serve merely by display. The Vatican can be considered an example of this. Power, on the other hand, is often best served by discretion and secrecy. Well known, the contents of the Vatican archives remained an open secret. Known by all, available to none. Other contemporaries existed. In Switzerland, the Pictet Bank had served the wealth of the world for over 2 centuries, its existence openly acknowledged, its treasures known to none. Unlike the Topkapi Palace in the age of the Janissaries, these and similar institutions survived. In their halls of power, the Topkapi Museum had been regarded as a cautionary tale. Spanning 1/9 of the galaxy, the Shorvanti Imperium had power and wealth beyond comprehension. Its institutions have their names as well. Excerpt from Comparative Cultures, Early Terran Entry into the Imperium, Cambridge University Press, 2371. She wants to do what? As Minister of the Interior, those words had been the first thought in Lauren Raylin's mind, being told of Princess Kalira's plans to visit the Imperial Palace in a tour group. After a moment's consideration, her actual reply was, "Thank you, Agent Davari. Send one pod, but tell the rest of your detachment to enjoy the afternoon." She looked at the message a second time and hit send. There would be details to arrange, of course. The Imperial Palace boasted the best security possible, but it was seen to be a residence. It had the functions of a command post that could exercise effective control over Home Fleet, a small army of administration managers, clerks, and functionaries, and several armies of support staff. It was vast, but it was, first and foremost, the home of the Empress, with all the literal and symbolic importance that entailed to the Shilvanti people. It was hallowed ground, sacrosanct, the embodiment of continuity in the Imperium, ever since there had been an Imperium. As a residence, the security was there, but aside from the 2 glaives that stood duty at the gate, it was largely unseen. There would have to be a security alert. To simply rely on one pod of death's heads would be unthinkable, but normal security at the palace should suffice. Something elevated, certainly. A training exercise that wouldn't disrupt the tours. Raylan sent off the memorandum and pondered her drink. It all came down to questions of morality and the person of the Empress. The Empress was not just a person. People swore by her, and although it was frequently irrelevant, the fact that they did spoke volumes. The Empress was the Imperium, and although her person was not divine, there were certain connotations between her station and the priestesshood, as a symbol of all that was right, best, and just. And that was where the interior came in. While not initially one of its responsibilities, and certainly nowhere in the ministry's portfolio, the interior ensured that the best young woman got the job for the good of the Imperium. It was understood by the higher ranks of the nobility. It was most certainly understood by the Empress herself. That was not the same as using the Empress as a pawn. The thought was inconceivable and quite literally impossible. The power of the interior derived from the Empress, and should there be even a whiff of such corruption, the assembly of nobles would destroy the interior without hesitation. It was the interior's remit to ensure the security of the Empress and the imperial family, and to see the right woman sat on the throne, by order of the first Empress. Raylan wondered what the woman had been like. An Imperium with no one left to fight had only itself. After the last queendom fell, she'd had the presence of mind to consider her posterity, and the Ministry of the Interior had been born. Overtly, it was seldom an issue. When Empress Callista died, the selection of her heir was already settled. Either Kamalesh or Katria were both excellent options, but Arduina hadn't been suitable. Callista had known it, decreed her will, and the interior had played no part in the succession. Now, however, the right heir would have been Princess Kalandri. Diligent and intelligent, Kalandri had been the very image of Kamalesh in every aspect. Trained, affable, a diligent officer, Kalandri possessed all the qualities necessary to become a fine empress. Looking to the future, Kamalesh had been content, the assembly of nobles had been content, and the people had been content. Then the blasted woman had the indecency to go and die. Raylan knew Kamalesh. Her empress was also her friend, and the loss had hit Cammy hard. Still, she'd had the presence of mind to rise above her grief and set necessary matters into motion. At which point, it came down to morality. There was a difference between moral and immoral. That much anyone could grasp. It was the difference between immoral and amoral that tended to catch people off guard. Sometimes immoral or amoral could still be effective, even ruthlessly so, and in the right time and place, each had their uses. Someone immoral or amoral could still be adored by the masses. Being liked had its uses. But an immoral woman, in the person of the Empress? Popularity was not the same thing as stability of the Imperium, and the mandate of the first Empress had been absolutely clear. The Imperium must survive under the best Tazu for the job. An amoral person, though. To be an empress required a certain amount of self-confidence, and amoral people tended to have egos thick as battle plate. Amoral people could be likable, particularly if they thought it served their interests. For the greater good, an empress sometimes had to order actions that could devastate lives, and an amoral person could execute such duties with ease. An amoral person could serve, even serve well. and that brought Lorem to her latest orders. Princess Camordri was amoral, self-interested, and effete, but those were not in themselves disqualifying traits. An amoral empress could take the position that what was good for the Imperium was good for her. Some had. It could be managed, and though Camordri was not likable in person, that wasn't the same thing. She had served in the interior rather than the military, but she had served. She cultivated personal connections within the nobility. Most of all, she had never taken any overt actions, not in keeping with her responsibilities. Kamalesh loved her daughter. Kami didn't like her very much, but that was another matter. Prince Lorau had become a fine young man, but like his cousin Indara, he'd removed himself from public life. A distant prospect for the throne, no one had questioned his decision to marry well and start a family. He was a dutiful son. His wives and children were both respected and loved, and his marriage has strengthened the imperial family. But an emperor was not a popular choice. The last had been a disaster. Kamalesh loved her son and her granddaughters, but his succession to the throne would make for difficult times. Princess Indara didn't have Lorau's excuse. Rather than embrace life in the imperial family, she had done her very best to disappear. Although Indara's relationship with her mother was kept quiet, her choice had made things difficult. Her eventual resumption of public life by marrying a human had not gone over well with traditionalists in the assembly. Privately, Kami loved her niece and adored Adam and Indara's co-wives. Pragmatically, Indara was serving the Imperium in ways no one could imagine, and if the assembly knew how, they'd like that idea considerably less. Still, the girl had firmly taken herself out of the succession, literally had no prospect of heirs, and putting her back into the picture would be problematic. Princess Kalira was turning into an interesting young woman. She was too young to consider thrusting onto the throne. Such things had happened in the past, but the crushing weight of responsibilities was very real, and Kalira wasn't ready. Neither was she out in public. She was known to the Imperium, but not known by the Imperium. To the Assembly of Nobles, she was unproven. To the public at large, she was unknown. Camordri wasn't Lorem's ideal heir, and didn't envy any minister that had to rein in her excesses, but sometimes the deep-minder you knew was better than the one you did not. She had the training, but she was untested. Kamalesh loved her youngest daughter, but she had the Imperium to consider. She was put in a position neither she nor anyone else had ever expected to face, all of which was why the blasted old battle-axe seized on the chance to run off with the largest personal battle fleet in the galaxy and dump the problem on me. Not that there was any doubt over Kami's grief. Right now, somewhere along the Alliance border, someone was receiving every single measure of the Empress's bad mood. Whoever they were having a very bad day. But running off to vent her grief hadn't meant Kamalesh was being irrational. Her Imperial Majesty had opted to make the interior earn its damned keep. Like it or not, that was very much a part of the interior's unwritten portfolio, and her orders were clear. While Kamalesh was away, Lorem was to watch, to judge, to see how matters played out. With the person of the Empress absent, she was to see how the character of Kami's children revealed themselves. Only in the greatest extremes was the interior to act. Of course, Kamalesh knew nothing about the death of her granddaughter. That would hit her hard when she returned, but it wouldn't have changed her orders. Lorem considered the matters in play. Acting in the presence of her mother, Princess Camordri Tassu would give the opening remarks for Efrovi, a public duty of considerable importance that could do no actual harm. It might, in fact, prove to be revealing. Sequestered away at the academy, Princess Kalira had just offered up something remarkably less public, but for Lorem's needs, it might prove to be educational. Within the Shorvanti Imperium, the institution of the Empress was paramount. Possessed of an unfathomable wealth and power, the Empress commanded more than armies. She commanded legions of armies. Vast fleets patrolled the galaxy, hers to command, from the greatest capital ship to the humblest courtier. Since the first days of the Shivanti Queendom, that power had been on display, since Her Highness, Aleri Tessu, created the Golden Glaives. Less a matter of wealth, but more a matter of power, was the creation of the Ministry of the Interior. The queens and later empresses of House Tessu believed in power, wealth, and understood the confluence between the two. Generation after generation, they also embraced the view that there was room at the top and held the conviction they should occupy all of it. In the uppermost echelons of the Assembly of Nobles, the Vatidara, there was some polite disagreement with this point of view. As women of wealth and power, they possessed the influence necessary to make their will manifest, by an agency all their own. Like all such institutions, once called into being, it took its survival into its own hands. Hidden in plain sight, its greater powers were also its most closely guarded secrets. Set in the capital of the planet Shil, the beating heart of the Imperium, it adopted the pragmatic perspective that, now and then, it was sensible to outwardly reinvent itself. Still, wealth always had value, and power offered security, yet occasionally it was useful to become something new, and as the schemes of individual duchesses and houses and cabals had come and went, it survived. Its facade known to all, its services known to some, and its scope known by few. Its latest incarnation had been established early in the reign of Empress Callista, and it had a name. "Oh, lick me!" "That is no way to speak to me, young lady. Now give me 10 more steps without twitching." "Ah! Fuck, that hurts!" Fighting to get fine motor control over her implant, Desi hauled herself along the parallel bars as best as she could. She even made it 9 steps before her foot had twisted painfully out from under her with a life all its own, and she grimaced in pain. "Fine! Lick me, you royal sadistic bitch!" "That's better. Now on your feet, woman!" Melondi crossed her arms. "You're doing 5 more lengths before we quit, and no twitching." "Fine," Desi growled. The implant in her spine was progressively tuning itself, but every so often it sent an arm flailing, twitched, or sent her tumbling to the ground. Desi hauled herself to her feet and stood up straight, her body responding for now. She glared up to where Zinshiki balanced on one bar with her left foot. "You are not helping." "Once your body acclimates, you may be able to do this." The Persian sprang up and landed on the opposite bar, balancing on her right foot. "I'm inspiring you as a role model." "I swear I do not understand you." Desi breathed out, venting her exasperation as she took a step. One step turned to a second and a third. She reached 8 before... "Hand!" Melondi shook her head, pointing at Desi. "Start over." Deshin snarled as she started over, her glare pure venom, but she put one foot in front of the other, willing her body to get it right. "I do not understand either of you." Zinshiki leaned forward, flicked her aside before somersaulting into the air. She landed flawlessly. "You venerate the Empress, but Desi can say these things to you? It would not happen in a warband." "Okay, I'm inspired now. When I kill you, they won't find a body." Desi grimaced at the display. "Anyway, what wouldn't?" "All of it," Zinshiki shrugged, but her Asaic flickered in mirth. "We respect our bandmothers. You show reverence to your Empress, yet you freely say these things to Melondi." "It's simple." Melondi looked over Desi, checking for any quiver. "Shulvanti venerate the Empress. Once crowned, she represents all of the virtues of the Imperium to her people, and none of the vices. A princess is just a princess, but the Empress is the continuity of our people." "It seems inefficient." Zinshiki's Asaic flicked dismissively.
A mother in a war band is selected by merit by the group of other band mothers. We do not select people just by birth.
That's why princesses are raised out of the public eye and given as normal an upbringing as possible. There are advantages you just aren't seeing. Melondi waved Deshin forward as they reached the end of the row, watching her turn around. We're raised around the government our entire lives. Know it better than any regular noble possibly could. I've seen the Imperium working every single day. Could one of your band mothers say the same?
Perhaps not, Zinshiki shrugged. I can see the attraction. For Shovanti.
Very generous. Thanks a lot, Melondi said with a grimace, before flicking Zinshiki the V. Every princess knows how things work. But aside from our training, we're raised normally. The problem is my mother only had the 4 of us, instead of 5 or 6. 4 isn't normal. Well, 3 now. Melondi's face fell before she rallied. On the bright side, Indara will receive either the Western or Southern Palace, though it could alarm some of the great houses, you see?
It's as clear as glass.
Zinshiki canted ahead after a moment.
The glass is at the bottom of a mine shaft on a moonless night, but it is as clear as glass. Let me try.
Deshin reached the end of the row and took a deep breath.
It's simple. If a princess was raised only as a princess, she could be tempted to delegate too much. When someone delegates all their work, pretty soon they don't know what's going on, who to trust, who's corrupt, or even who's doing a good job. That sounds a great deal like Princess Camordri.
That's treasonous and wrong, Mel said gruffly. She has some weird affectations, but she was trained by the Interior and had a decent career. When she sets her mind to something, she's focused as a laser. It's just
because someone is a royal or a noble doesn't mean they can't also be a sadistic bitch,
Desi offered. She is not a sadist. Mel rolled her eyes. Just because someone is in the Interior does not make them a sadist.
I wasn't talking about her,
Desi muttered. Oh. Funny, Mel snorted. Make that 5 lengths.
You said that 2 laps ago.
Mel crossed her arms sternly. Your hand twitched again.
That was for emphasis.
Mel cocked her head to one side. Then stop it twitching now?
Fine. 5 more lengths.
Zinshiki slowly bent over backward. Nearly supporting herself on a foot and 2 hands, she kicked one leg up as her Asaic went parallel to the floor.
So, do you have a palace?
Well, kind of. There's the main palace, and the north, east, west, and south palaces. The eastern one is for the heir, and Kalandri held that before she died. My brother Laurel had the western palace, but he gave it up in favor of his wife's private estate. Zatora would be alive now if he hadn't. There would have been all the extra security. I can't imagine what he's going through right now.
So you will receive the southern palace.
Zinshiki flexed on her toes, rolled to her feet, and moved over to sit on one of the empty gym equipment boxes.
Since Camordri has the northern one, or will there be alterations for your cousin?
That's trickier. Camordri was given the northern palace, which is supposed to be important, but she had a falling out with my mother. It's far from the capital and the weather is terrible. It's kind of a punishment. Anyway, once a princess comes out in public, estates are assigned by the Empress by merit, not order of birth or anything, and there are just 3 of us now.
Your cousin seems admirably capable.
Zinshiki wandered to Deshin's side, observing without commitment.
What about your 2 aunts?
Indara's great, but she did marry a human, which stirred a lot of the houses up. Another problem is that she ran off rather than face her duties, and the assembly would have a hard time with... Zinshiki, what are you doing in that box?
It's comfortable,
Zinshiki murmured, as her eyes appeared over the lip of the container.
Peshrin do not have palaces. I've had a ship's bunk since I was free, by your counting. Shudder all you like, but I am at home in confined spaces. So your aunts will not move back into a palace?
Once the succession moves to the next generation, you become a duchess. Katria is a governess, but will take up a territory. Ordwina and Indara will get a duchy. Mother's thinking about somewhere on Earth for Dara because of Prince Adam. The point is, a palace isn't your private property. It's more like a public trust, and how you manage it says a lot. Melondi frowned in thought and scowled at Deshin. And the two of you can stop being cute and trying to distract me. You're doing 4 more lengths. Zinchiki sank back into the box.
I do not do cute. Free! You're just in a bad mood because of this trip with Vadim. Oh, lick me.
One other aspect that is central to power and wealth is communication. While the terminology can vary, any standing military will tell you that to be successful, a message must be clearly composed, clearly received, and clearly understood. Minister Raylin's memorandum was clear in its intent and effect. Princess Kalira was to be in residence as a part of a daily tour. She was not to be interfered with, nor treated as anything other than a visiting member of the public. However, on the day, security would conduct a readiness exercise, simply to ensure adequate protections were in place. The message was transmitted to our officers in the Imperial Palace, who disseminated it to palace security and the senior members of the palace staff. As a priority message, it was clearly received and duly acknowledged. That said, several senior members of the staff and court remained with Her Imperial Highness aboard Home Fleet, and secondary functionaries were tasked with filling in. Transmitted from palace security to the palace staff, the memorandum was clearly understood by everyone involved. Almost. Understandably, the Minister of Public Affairs remained away with Home Fleet and the Empress. When all was done, the people would want to share the story of Her Highness's rage for revenge. Even more certainly, the Assembly of Nobles would want an accounting. And so it was that, with the court away, the mantle descended on the shoulders of one Eslin Tarvi, Tertiary Assistant Vizier for Public Affairs. As a courtier without a court, her responsibilities within the Imperial Palace were considered minimal and well within the scope of her ability. They included palace tours. Eslin Tarvi read the memorandum and saw, neatly presented on a golden platter, a once-in-a-career opportunity for recognition.
Here's the problem with this line of work, man.
Creep was the most, well, the manliest Shorvanti male that Tom Steinberg knew.
Makes you crazy if you let it.
It wasn't a good look. Creep, the nickname Tom had given the operative, wasn't any Shorvanti's idea of masculine beauty, but the freelancer was very effective at what he did for the Inquisition. Just now, the soft yet gravelly-voiced little man currently stood on the wharf, watching the yacht club across the bay while playing on his omnipad. With Prince Adam and the Ladies of Pain away for now, Tom had time and a Pezrin on his hands. It would be rude not to use them. Tom Steinberg watched through the camera. What does? He noted possible entrances and exits, waiting for Creep to dispense his little pearl of wisdom.
Seriously? I mean, I'm not holding up a mirror, but how in the deuce do you even get in a fight with a yacht club?
Creep laughed a long, wheezy laugh.
Long story.
Maybe Tom was feeling a little vindictive, but he'd done worse. Far worse for less.
I've got nothing but time, man,
Creep said slowly. Fine. They insulted my wife. The bitch running this place tried to call the cops on my kids for swimming. Maybe it didn't need to be said, but Tom was careful divulging information. As sometime retainers to the Inquisition, the loose group he knew as the Lunatics were an eclectic bunch. He wasn't their only client, so it wouldn't do if they had dirt on him. The wife and pups, they knew. Men of Tom's age were always married with families on shill. Well, almost always. A single man stood out, and besides, he loved Davy and the pups, so fuck it. As a data point, it was harmless.
That's cool, man. But listen, I love ripping off people with nice things as much as the next guy, but you gotta make it worth my time.
Creep stood up and stretched, keeping his omnipad trained on the harbour.
I'm not in the vigilante business. Might feel nice and you make your own hours, but the pay sucks.
You'll get to take whatever you can carry, Tom sing-songed, dangling the verbal bait in front of him. You plus Tragan, plus me and my Pezrin. He let that last bit sink in a moment. You get a bunch of shiny stuff to sell, and now Creep and Tragan are the pair that a certain warband goes to when they need extra hands. Creep and Tragan. Now they'd be professional badasses. And Neen the Tashja? A Pezrin warband was chaos for hire, as long as you obeyed the rules and tried not to look too tasty.
So, seriously, you wanna go to war with the Harbour Point Yacht Club? How's that work?
Creep shrugged.
Even for you, that's not your usual vendetta.
This Gelf bitch is the chairwoman of the whole thing, and the Prelintory Homeowners Association. Tom grit his teeth as he looked out at his target, as it bobbed on the water. I know evil when I see it.
And so, we do what? Break their best flower pots?
Creep glanced up from his work.
If I can make a suggestion, man, get the association busted first before picking another crusade. Also, maybe consider therapy.
Fuck, as if that's my biggest problem. Tom checked his omnipad as Creep swiped over the data. Everything checked. The Gelf yacht was the third biggest in the harbour, but for tastelessness it had no competition. The ship's gilded lobby held a chandelier cast out of inconel and rhodium, with some sort of plasma light. Fancy handmade stuff, it had featured in an edition of Better Estates in Yachting. The thing was a work of art. Objectively, it was gaudy as hell, but it was worth a packet. For Dame Gelf, getting her showboat raised from the bottom of the bay would be a real bitch, but losing the fucker? Wouldn't that just be a damn shame? Swiping it from the bottom of the harbour would be cake, as long as they were fast. Things got swept away with the tide, didn't they? It would all be a matter of timing. Ever try and convince a Pezrin to go swimming in winter? Trust me, Creep, you guys have got it easy. Creep gave him a long look. Sometimes life had a way of giving you a wake-up call. A look at what you were doing. A mirror that said maybe it was time to examine your ways. A reality check where you could consider going down a different road. Maybe make some different choices. Straighten up and fly right? Nah. Besides, he'd guilt-tripped Perveri into the job. If she backed out now, he could say she wasn't willing to learn and call off the whole Hakakt thing. No questions asked. Tom smiled a smile of pending gratification. You can lead a Pezrin to water.
Seriously, sometimes I still don't know what the deeps you're talking about.
Creep shook his head dismissively.
Therapy. It could be good for you.
It wouldn't matter as long as Creep got paid. It wouldn't matter to Adam and the Inquisition as long as it didn't interfere with the plan. It wouldn't even matter if one teenage Pezrin backed out of a scuba dive. Sometimes life just handed you a win-win-win. The problem hadn't been the Shorvanti standing guard outside the office. No, the problem had been the second Shorvanti lurking inside the hallway. Just because Shorvanti were big and relied on their strength to overcome most opponents, people tended to think they were just brawlers. In fairness, it was largely true, but it was sloppy thinking. They were natural-born brawlers, but when you met a Shorvanti who knew how to fight, things changed. They didn't charge in, conserve their reach, measure their speed, and if they got their hands on you, you had a real problem. The first guard had been good, but the second guard had nearly taken him down, and the knife wound on his left shoulder hurt. He'd come in low, slashing across the woman's abdomen, and almost ducked her blade. Almost. The blow could have easily been a kill. It had come in hard and deep, but too high. His skin suit was able to close off bleeding, and he managed to carry on. The mission came first. The mission always came first. And that had been the mantra in training ever since he joined, and he'd applied himself. It was agency practice to recruit young candidates who showed aptitude, and the reward for loyalty was security, wealth, and an easy life on the inactive reserve. Of course, he'd had to go and fall in love, though it might only be lust, but it didn't feel that way. That kind of thing could become a problem. He'd have to talk to the manager about it soon. The thought made him grin. Human entertainment was still fairly rare, but after one of the other agents got a copy of Skyfall, calling the army manager Q and their manager M had become a running joke. The former had scowled, but the latter had taken it with good humour. Sidestepping the security cameras in the halls was child's play, and reaching the office, he punched in the access code. The door slid open quietly, and he stepped inside, closed the door, and studied the room. Evading the security lasers was simple. The beams were spaced for Shivanti, and he skipped through the net. It was only a matter of minutes to access the desk Omni, download the data, and close down the unit. He checked his handiwork. Someone actively looking might spot the intrusion, but a common user would never notice. Mission accomplished. It was time to get out and see to his shoulder. He was nearly to the door when he spotted it on a shelf. A bottle of Amphra Battle Glory lay in an open wooden case, covered in dust. No one had ever quite managed to copy the original, and the real stuff was almost priceless. There was time to check the box for traps. Still, he wasn't there for souvenirs. With a pang of regret, he left the bottle behind, skipped through the laser net, and made it to the door. The pad asked for the security code, and he punched it in. Denied. He tapped the pad again, quickly re-entering the code. Denied. Enter the correct code in 12, 11... Fuck. Separate codes. 2, 1... There was no way out, and he breathed in resignation as the world went white. Q's voice came over the loudspeaker at once. Sim complete, 98%. Not bad, but you know what you did wrong? I closed the door. Never close off your egress if you have the option to keep it available. Good work, largely. Now go get yourselves cleaned up. Outside the Sim building, Vristi and Kemlin picked themselves up off the ground and came over. Vristi gave him a wink, though Kemlin looked smug. Nearly got you that time. You mean Vristi did? And yanking on my asag was a dirty trick. That hurts a lot more than the tase daggers. A girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do, Vrist snorted. Kemlin stuck out her tongue and rolled it suggestively. You got the high score, again. How the deeps you always spot the damned cameras? Ancient Petrin secret, Pass replied with a flick of his asag, before checking the time. There was just enough to blow out his pelt, a bit of grooming, and dress. Past sauntered back to the locker room with a smile. It was a good life, being a waiter. All things came to the tide pool, and Alrada Kadrais looked over his domain with satisfaction. As manager, he seldom had to worry about the actual restaurant, entertainment, or the hired consultants. He had a staff for that. Mind, the Chippendales were pulling in the trade. The human physique really was a wonder, and he decided days ago to get a human into the agency as soon as possible. They stood out in a crowd, and they were largely restricted to their homeworld, but more and more individual humans were making their way into the galaxy, and pioneers tended to be the motivated type. The Tidepool loved motivation, and after the young Klassen boy came through, he'd issued a standing order to be informed of humans in the building. No, the majority of his job as manager was the other side of the business, from the boys and girls working in trade gathering and disseminating information to the special clientele, to the staff tasked with acquisitions, and all the myriad threads in between. The organization had all the money it required, and access to the kinds of information that made money irrelevant. Yes, originally it had begun as a counter to the interior, and still served that function, but nothing succeeded like success. The universe operated on matter and energy. Within the universe, life operated on self-interest, and around the time life learned how to make fire, self-interest meant information. The Empress had her interior, the Consortium had its bureau, and the Alliance... well, there was just no helping some people. The Assembly's Shadow Cabinet had created the organization with an idea of checks and balances, inside and out, and although their motives had been less than pure, their creation endured, taking on a life of its own. The latest incarnation as the Tide Pool had been Atra Munro's stroke of genius. It was always good craft to flourish one hand while hiding the other, but their incarnation as Tide Pool truly went above and beyond. Certainly it was a cover that earned its keep, and for their clients, money was no object. For their special clients, even less so. As for the competition, rabid young noblewomen of the chest-beating variety had an opportunity to prove themselves in the interior, reflecting the glory of the Empress. Sensible young nobles joined the Navy and Marines, winning glory for the Empress. It made recruiting a difficult chore at times, but not entirely. Money didn't buy loyalty. One didn't win hearts and minds with a few credits a week or a medal on a breastplate. You had to speak to the soul. The women who worked for the Tide Pool universally retired with funds and positions established in life. The men did rather better, of course, marrying wives of distinction or up-and-comers. It was so much better than simply being bartered. For all the Tide Pool demanded in time, risk, toil, and training, it offered two things no one else could: independence and security. The problem remained that the Tide Pool was an overt shell, and the organization within required discretion. One couldn't exactly text out recruiting posters to... Alrada glanced over at his omnipad as an alert flickered over the screen. Table alert. Dasari. Party of 8 men, 2 returns, 4 humans. Alrada cocked his head. A reservation by someone on the retired list always bore note. But 2 wayward sons? And 4 humans, including Tom Warwick? Now that was something. Princess Kalira's favourite teacher, if Rebecca Irilon was correct. The Duchess was a wonderful woman, and her work as Minister of Education was invaluable. Her visits were infrequent, but her news was always reliable. Rebecca's a kindred spirit, married to her work. If I wasn't married to mine, she'd be so very tempting. But that was the tide not taken. He pulled up the names and snorted. So much for surprise. Berdin Dasari. An outstanding chef, his private dinner parties had always been a platinum mine. The other name was unfamiliar, and he pulled up the file. Brelak Tidova. Of course. How could he forget Berdin's favourite busboy? Not part of the organisation. Brelak had been far too timid for work, but he and Berdin had been thick as thieves, and marrying him off to that Dasari girl had been the right thing to... Another alert flashed over his screen, and Arada frowned at the interruption, pulling it up. One alert was one thing, but 2? Was the princess... Oh. Oh my. Table alert. Dasari. Party of 10 women. 3 humans. Arada considered the possibilities and looked at the seating chart. Jara Hamaris had been going on about bringing Warwick in for months. Sure enough, Atra Munro's partner in crime was booked for his usual table. Alrada moved the men's reservation from the second floor down to the main floor, adjacent to Jama's. As for the second reservation, they were booked for a 6th floor booth, something affordable that offered a distant view of the center stage. After a moment's consideration, he moved their reservation to the far side of the room on the second floor. The view wasn't quite as direct, but it was closer. More importantly, it had no view whatsoever of Jama's table out on the main concourse. There was no need to create a scene. Well, sometimes there was, but not for this. Still. Alrada stared at the pictures of the younger humans in the party. Unfortunately, the boys looked a bit too old, but the girl? Alrada looked at his omnipad thoughtfully as he fired a text off to his head waiter. No one had a girl. It was never a sure thing, but there was no harm in opening doors. Jalissa was very approachable. Hiram, move past Ajama's table tonight and tell Jalissa I want her on standby to make a pitch. One aspect of his work was to circulate amongst the clientele and make sure everything was in order. Tonight could be a very entertaining evening. There were always opportunities.